Hey everyone, it's Maureen. I wanted to kind of give a book flip through since I haven't done one in a while. I recently had acquired Tudor Textiles by Hilary Lynn. And this is the first time I'm getting an opportunity to actually flip through this book. So you're getting to enjoy the journey with me. It's a nice, heavy, hardbound book. And from what I could tell, it looks like we have some amazing pictures in here of textiles from the period. Now, I hope we're not getting too much glare from the images, so to speak. It says, in association with Historic Royal Palaces, Yale University Press. So a little bit of a poem, your attribution. So what we have here, it looks like you have a general introduction to what textiles were in the period. Talks about what they were, so to speak, happening in the time frame, as far as how they decorated private spaces for royalty and nobility. Then also talks about how they are inventoried in the Great Wardrobe, and then just the materials and techniques as well. So we're just going to flip through. I haven't read this yet, so as far as the content, I haven't gotten an opportunity to actually read through. But I've heard a lot of great things. The images, I can definitely say, are fantastic. Looks like here they give you an idea of what the measurements were as far as terminology, so that's helpful. This looks like this is an image from the Field of the Cloth of Gold. So there is Mr. Henry himself, or His Majesty anyway. And then this is one of the other famous portraits that you run into, which is sort of the family, it's mentioned as the family of Henry VIII, circa 1545. So you have, I believe, Mary over here, his son Edward, Henry. Jane's a little difficult to see, but she's sort of in the middle here. And then you have Elizabeth off to the side. And there's a few other servants actually in the doorway. I think this one was a court fool, I believe, but I'm not sure about this fellow over here. But she's talked about for some of the clothing items, I believe, that she had in period as well. This talks about shearing and the great wool industry that occurred. We have a set of very old shears, and then this little series here looks like you have flax being spun, and then weights and measures and quality being written down. An example of a beautiful ecclesiastical cope from the 16th century, saying that it was in Spain, silk dyed with cochineal from Mexico, and embroidery of silk and metal threads. So this is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And it gives the item number. It's interesting how textiles really had a hard time surviving. They are not preserved like we think of preservation nowadays. This is an image of a loom, because you have your adjustment wheel here. These are heddles that move up and down, which could be strung in a couple different ways to produce different weaves. So your fiber production comes off the front. This is your finished item, and then this is all of the warp that has yet to be woven. So it's kind of interesting that they do show a little bit of the process here. And this is to give an idea of some of the sheer yardage of materials. And if you wore and had an ability to, let's say, have a train on a garment, that means that you had money to be able to allow it to touch the ground. Now, this is Sir Antonis Moore, circa 1576. Portrait of Sir Thomas Gresham. Oh, okay, Antonis Moore, I think, was the artist. Merchant to the Royal Court. Oil on panel. Rijksmuseum, Amsterdam. So he's wearing a lot of fine cloth here, you can see, and a lot of black, which was a hard color to produce with natural dyes. But he got his fancy ruff, so he was a man of status. He was a knight, after all. And then Henry was also known for his love of tapestries. So I wasn't really surprised that we're seeing a lot of tapestries here that were woven specifically. And if you had many castles or really large houses, tapestries are a great way of keeping in the heat and yet having a wonderful way of decorating. We're talking about globalization and things on this particular page. So they're going to go into the manufacturing, how it affected the economy at the time. And this is a detail from the Bacton altar cloth from 1600, silk and silver, camlet embroidered with silk and metal threads. Among the motifs are boats, a large sea creature conjuring up the Tudor fascination with voyages to distant lands in the age of exploration. That's what the little description says here. So even though this has aged a lot, you can really tell the motifs and what they enjoyed, and what this would have looked like when it was new would have been amazing. Bright, bold, beautiful colors most likely, and made of very fine silk would have given it a beautiful sheen. Let's see here. Dyeing of silk yarn, that's what they're showing over here. Let's see, engraving from the Pilecchio dell'arte dei Tenori. Apologize if I murdered that. Circa 1548, Getty Research Institute, Los Angeles. So that means that this is more than likely Genoa up here, Frenzia or Frisia and Genoa. So this is Italian, or written in Italian, but showing the dyeing process in it like a woodcut. Here's another wonderful. See, the arrival of Queen Penicilia at Troy, 1475 to 1490, tapestry, wool and silk, woven at Tournai. Several sets of the Troy tapestries were provided to the courts of Europe, including those of Charles the Bold of Burgundy in 1472 and Henry VIII in 1488. The tapestry was one of a set made for Charles VIII of France and was listed in his inventory in 1494. This is from the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and it gives the item number. But even still, if this has sort of tanned over time, like this white would have been a bright white, these would have been hugely bright and colorful, and would have, especially with the metal, they would have gleamed, especially if the sunlight had hit them. So these were great, impressive pieces that took a lot of money to be able to afford. Sort of looks like a sketch of a painted chamber. And then it looks like this is a watercolor from 1790 to 1810, which showed the placement of certain tapestries in one of the palaces in Westminster Palace. So these tapestries were arranged in the room to give very specific and bold decoration to the walls and really shows status and power. And this one looks like this is a beautiful coat of arms here. Tapestry of Millifleurs, which you run into in other tapestries where it has a flowered textured background like this. This says it is English Royal Coat of Arms circa 1485 to 1590 wool and silk woven in the southern Netherlands. And this is hanging in Handon Hall, Derbyshire. So there's a few pieces of heraldic significance here. If I don't know if anybody particularly knows this, I've studied a mild bit of heraldry, just enough to get mine passed through the SCA. But you basically have this belt of chivalry, so to speak, and then they have other pieces of it. Like this one ends up having a white edge to it and a blue edge, and then they're very ornately decorated. So it's meant to show status, and there is writing on this, which is most likely in Latin. And then you have, of course, decorated leaves. You have a knight's helm at the top, which you see normally in somewhat later depictions. And then we have the lion who is wearing a coronet. So you have quite a lot of symbolism in just this one complete image. And millifleurs, if you're able to kind of look around the background a little bit here, millifleurs were used in tapestries. These are the ones that were made from kits that are wool. This is all 100% wool embroidery. And these were kits that showed me how to do it. Millifleurs basically means million flowers. And that's basically where you have this background where there's just flowers everywhere adorning the background. You also sometimes will run into trees and animals as well. So when they're talking about millifleurs, they're talking about million flowers. So this background where it has all the textures and flowers. These are examples of the Cluny tapestries from France, and they also have the millefleur background as well, where there's just flowers and trees and animals adorning the background. Oh, let's see here. So we have Lady Margaret Beaufort, 1443 to 1509. And you can see how texture and fabric really play an important role here. You have basically a hanging tapestry showing her royal status right up here, and then the arms that are woven onto it, and then all of the brocaded background, and then a matching altar cloth to go with it, and then this beautiful silk around her prayer book. There's all these textures and textiles that are very important. And even in the field of the cloth of gold, the tents were ornately decorated. They just weren't left as a basic looking canvas tent. They actually were made from beautiful materials and decorated. Let's see here, detail from the Great Tournament, Roll of Westminster, 1511. A watercolor and gilding on vellum. And from what I can see here, you have this tent-like item that's very heavily decorated. You have, of course, all the clothing is heavily decorated. You have the area around the monarch, which of course has heavily decorated and heraldic symbolism. And then also the knights are going to have their heraldry also showing as well. So a lot of things that could be embroidered and decorated multiple different ways to show your wealth. Let's see, Meeting of Henry VIII, Emperor Maximilian, 1513. Oil on panel. So this is more like a commemoration of the day, but yet again, you're seeing the grandeur here because you have the decorated tents. as well as all of the heraldry that is decorating the horses to show status. So cloth was very important. Textiles were very important. Here is another Triumph of the Death over Chastity, a series of Triumph of Petrarch, 1503 to 1523, Flanders tapestry, wool, and silk. So unfortunately, I think you can still see some of the metal in the way that the image was taken. So this would have really gleamed in the sunlight as well. But yes, very epic pieces from history that they would choose to depict, and the clothing normally was from the time frame that the item was actually made, not necessarily the clothing showing the people from the story time frame. So you do run into this a lot where they will make them look in modern clothes of the time. Let's see, Aeneas encountering his mother Venus, from a series illustrating the story of Dido and Aeneas, early 1530s. So this is another wonderful tapestry. It's kind of hard to tell. I think we're getting a lot of glare. There we go. It's not so bad. But yeah, a lot of very detailed tapestry work, facial depictions, clothing textures, nature. You know, yet again, some very beautiful stuff. So this looks like it's a procession here. Coronation procession of Edward the Sixth, 18th century, hand-colored engraving. Okay, so kind of showing the progression. And these are yet again a commemoration kind of item, showing an event. One moment here, I want to find a book stand. So give me just a... All right, so this helps a little bit. This happens to be Mary I and her husband Philip of Spain. And you can really see a lot of gold going on in this particular image, because you also have the symbols of royalty, his arms here, her arms of England there. So a lot of heraldry going on, a lot of textures and metal embroidery to show the royal status. And this is her brother. Also, you're seeing a lot of the same depictions. You have this very ornate carpet down at the bottom. You have his heraldry back here, the status of royalty with the canopy, and then his clothing, of course, being very heavily ornate. So textiles didn't necessarily mean just textiles that are hanging on the wall like these beautiful tapestries. They also ended up meaning the clothing that the royals were wearing, because here's Queen Elizabeth and her gown is just bedecked, and she's seeing a classical scene here. Let's see, Elizabeth and the Three Goddesses from 1574. She's wearing her crown. She has the orb in her hand. And of course, during her time frame, that kind of symbolism was very popular. But it was also popular earlier with her father and other folks of royal status, because it went back to Mary Beaufort there, because you saw that in her painting, even though her clothing was a little bit more plain but finely made. And then we have embroidered like Bible prayer book covers. So I mean, they use these textures all over the place. And like the kits that I am going to be making, we also have one of Mary Queen of Scots panels from 1569 to 84, silk on canvas. Now it's an octagonal piece, a interlaced monogram with the Lily of France and the Thistle of Scotland with a royal crown above. It's held in the royal collection, so they still have these pieces. And I'm hoping to find more of the panels from the Dundonald series just to do those Mary Queen of Scots pieces, because they're amazing pieces that they were able to translate and make into something that a lover of history like myself could enjoy. Now, those are all wool. They don't have any of the silk in there, but there are ways of incorporating the silk. But we have some wonderful textures here. Nicholas Hilliard, 1574 to 1669, a young man among the roses, a portrait from 1587, a watercolor on vellum. So great textures here for the clothing. And then, of course, Elizabeth, not to be outdone. We have this wonderful portrait here by an unknown artist. It says a rainbow portrait because she's holding a rainbow in her hand here. But there's a lot of symbolism in this as well. There's a snake on her sleeve. There are eyes all over this robe because she's under constant supervision, if you want to. There's even some mouths and some ears on this particular robe. So people are listening, they are talking, and they are watching her, if you want to put it that way. So always under observation. But when you're the king or queen, privacy is not really a thing. It didn't seem to be anyway. And then it looks like we're going into what the floral motifs were as far as botanical, and then how they were then later embroidered, because this is a embroidered piece from 1600 where you're getting to kind of see that when they depicted flowers, that they were sort of in a botanical presentation. Same thing here. This is more fruits and flowers sort of situation, presenting them botanically in a needlework format. And of course, Queen Elizabeth in a litter, being carried in a procession. And you do yet again see a lot going on here with her outfit as well. And we have more fruits and flowers going on in this particular image. Just a close-up more of the botanical representations. There's some animals in here too. There's a snail over here, and I think this is a dog. Let's see. Detail backed in alder cloth. Again. Which is one of the few surviving embroidered pieces, and it is meant, the backed in alder cloth, also supposed to be a piece of one of Queen Elizabeth's dresses. And then we have ladies doing various different types of needle arts. There's an embroidery stretched on a frame. There's another piece there. They're working on a pillow over here. So there's several different ways to do it. Someone's playing some music. And it looks like this cloth over here is highly decorated. And then this particular image is showing a loom in progress and some ladies sitting down here embroidering down in front. And this is one of the first samplers that exists. This is worked by Jane Bostock of Shropshire in 1598. It's a linen embroidered with colored silk and metal threads, seed pearls and beads. It says, this is the earliest dated British sampler and records the birth of a child. Samplers served as a reference piece for experienced embroiderers as well as for novices and were worked by gentlewomen as well as noblewomen. This is in the Victoria Albert Museum. But I mean, we have some really beautiful motifs. She was definitely a practiced embroideress. Now this looks like to be a panel. Yep, a panel of pile-on-pile velvet from 1500 to 1550. So this is to give you an idea of what the texture would look like. And then the image over here of a detail of Queen Elizabeth, or excuse me, Queen Mary the First portrait. This is to show you what that velvet would have looked like in the wild, so to speak. And her four sleeves match her forepart and are, of course, heavily decorated. This is a sketch, Henry VIII during his privy chambers in the late 1540s. So kind of showing the grandeur of how things are set up, because you have the royal canopy with arms. Always seems to be a present motif to show status. And here's a detail more of that as well, where you have his arms. Here's Jane Seymour, here's Henry, there's Edward. But heavily decorated. The Millifleur pattern was hugely popular. And it's a lot of stylized flowers. Let's see here. It's like Henry in prayer over here. So yet again, you know, some very lush textures around their majesty. And then you have Queen Elizabeth I here. And one of my favorite outfits. Let me see here. Hampton portrait of Queen Elizabeth, 1563, oil on panel. Cloth of estate. Okay, so that's what it's called, cloth of estate, which would be the canopy situation. Then you have, of course, a huge textile rug down here, lots of texture, and then fruits and flowers and all sorts of other detail. It's just showing techniques of the time. Oh, dinner serviettes, as they call it in England. What they are basically are a towel, like these fellows are either holding or have over their shoulder, to wipe your mouth. So what we would call in America a napkin, instead of it being made out of paper, was cloth at the time, and normally decorated, because you could decorate everything. This looks like King Edward VI and the Pope, 1575, oil on panel. Henry VIII is depicted passing power, both temporal and spiritual, to the young Edward. This is another event-based portrait painting. And then you have the privy councilors over here, and you have Edward and Henry's in the bed doing his duty, passing on his powers of estate to the son. And the Pope is sort of being somewhat deposed, I think, here at the bottom. So lots of symbolism yet again. Let's see, drawing of late 16th century Flemish tapestry. So this is a drawing of a tapestry that it looks like may not exist, because some of they were not always stored very well, and therefore we only can go off of the images from the period and not necessarily have all of the examples that have preserved and made it through centuries. So we have the canopy, cloth of state, and lush clothing yet again. And even the woodwork is highly decorated with motif. See, a valance. And then a detail of a tapestry over here, which has all sorts of figurines. A lot of angel winged looking creatures and devils as well. Let's see, curtain, early 17th century England, linen embroidered on silk. That'd be this one. One set of panels, probably for a bed valance, 1560. So a lot of images I haven't seen before, actually. And this one looks like it is Queen Elizabeth visiting someone. Let me see here if we have it. Elizabeth receiving Dutch ambassadors. Okay, 1570. So yet again, very ornate clothing. It looks like this might be fur-lined here. All right. I think we ended up stopping about here. The camera decides that it doesn't want to film. So we have these surviving pieces. You can see a lot of them at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where they have these panels of fabric that are things that can't be woven now. More ornate, wondrous clothing. Let's see, King's Council Chamber. We have Queen Elizabeth in prayer. Yet again, wondrous textures. And a cushion from 1600 that's heavily embroidered. And there's metallic lace and tassels. Even the privy chamber itself, yes, this is a toilet. It has silk velvet on it, of all things. So one's bum must be cushy. We have Henry, looks like he is in prayer. A book cover that looks like it is heavily embroidered with the coat of arms for Henry at that time. And this goes into the Great Wardrobe, which talks about the textiles that were worn by people, as well as the household items that the royals would have used. And we have some wondrous examples here. Let's see, drawing of the Chateau d'Annette. So, yet again, showing textures in clothing and themes of the time. And then we have more of a pour scenes showing what everyday people were wearing. Sort of a simple street composition. And we have examples of the wool industry where we have shearing going on, because you have a set of shears here and the sheep are being laid out to collect their wool. Then the great textile spinning. You have this big bundle of wool right here, and then they're spinning it all. This is flax right here. So you have both represented in that image. And this lady's in her full dress, yet these fellows are sort of in a state of undress, but they are fulling and dyeing the fabric, which I'm sure was not exactly cold work. An example of a beating and combing flax is basically this piece. So they have a lot of good examples of what it looked like in the time frame. And this yet again goes over collecting silk, because these are silkworms, and how that is then transported. These are from, let's see, 1590s. Yeah, these are from engravings from the 1590s showing the process and how silk was produced. Seeing a lot of women working in the textile industry here. Dyeing wool detail from Isaac Clance van Swanberg, 1594 to 1596. So basically moving the fabric and textile fibers around with a long pole so you didn't get your hands dirty. Although their sleeves are rolled up because they probably don't want to get that dye on them. Talk about cultivating the noble cactus in Mexico to farm cochineal insects. So there's even manuals from the time frame trying to show how you get the insects to then create the color. They even go into some enslavement here from people from Guinea digging gold and silver in the Spanish held Hispaniola. So it even goes into how not just peasant people were doing the work, but how with the discovery of the New World, unfortunately, they enslaved a lot of the indigenous population to then start creating the things that they needed to send back to the home country. So you're seeing the beginning of the empire situation for both Spain and England at this point in time. Talk about Venetian silk and how it's woven. Here is a heavily decorated cope. Cloth of gold tissue. That would be these guys here. Stonehurst, Chasuble, 1500 Florence. So an ecclesiastical piece. And some more of these. This panel in real life, getting to actually see this is absolutely amazing. It is beautiful beyond words. If you get the opportunity to go to the Metropolitan Museum and get to see The textile panels, they are to die for. They really are. You know, we have this textured rug here on the table. This beautiful silk sleeves, which go with the undergarment. And woven carpet. And Anatolian carpet from the 16th century. So knotted wool. Here's a detail of the texture that you see. So we have like a strawberry here, we have some flowers here. So this book is a book you'll have to move around to kind of look at the different images as well. Because there is a lot, my gosh. Neat, and even going over needle lace, I was not expecting it, but it would be a textile of the time frame. So you have examples of needle lace. This is a more detailed image of the panel they had earlier showing embroidery. Here's this woven carpet. This is this half of the painting. They showed a bigger half earlier. And then you have an illuminated piece here showing you what the motifs look like. These floral, windy, stylized acanthus sleeves with roses. They did it on their illumination, but they also ended up putting it in the textiles. Here's the top part of Mary the First, with this ornate velveted chair with tassels. And there's this beautiful velvet forepart and sleeves. Just, you know, heavy pile velvet, which they really don't make anymore. And if they do make a version of it, it's not exactly how it was in the time frame. And it still would cost you a lot of money. So sort of a study of animals. And then this is a drawn out motif on linen that hadn't been embroidered yet. So this is an embroidery pattern to be embroidered. But you can tell the grain of the linen. That is meant, it was meant to be embroidered. And then a cushion cover 1600 silk velvet with applied linen needlework. So linen on velvet. There is a little bit of wool on linen, not just tapestry. There is a jacket in the Victoria Albert Museum that is wool on linen, red wool on white linen. And then this is another Tudor rose detail from the Bacton alder cloth. So they got some beautiful images that you could easily just freehand and draw this and, you know, do a version of it for yourself. The images they got were amazing. So they have a glossary of terms here, which would go over the different techniques. And then, of course, sources, which I will be reading over in detail. So that is Tudor Textiles by Larry Lynn. Just a nice flip through. I've not gotten to read the content, but what I am seeing in the pictures, they really went for it with this particular book. Even just looking at the pictures alone, I would recommend it. Without even getting into the research, which I bet you is even better. So this was a little bit of a flip through. If you like this kind of content, consider liking this video and possibly subscribing. I upload every other Friday. If you want to be notified, click the bell notification. YouTube's supposed to let you know on that when I do upload. And I really appreciate you getting through this very long video. If you've made it this far, you're awesome. And I will see you in my next video.